I had to protect her. If that involved loading the guns, then yes, I loaded the guns. If that involved going with her, then yes, I went with her. If that involved doing these horrible things, yes, I did that too. Those are the chilling words of Joseph McEnroe, confessing to one of the most senseless and horrific family massacres in American history. A massacre that happened on Christmas Eve, when most families are gathering to celebrate love and togetherness.
So I told Michelle, I'm like, okay, what now? Okay, so it's like, it's your idea, your plan, but what now? I only remember actually firing once. Apparently I fired twice. The second one hit her and sent home.
Before we dive into this twisted holiday nightmare, if you're new here, take a second to hit that subscribe button. Our team digs deeper into these cases than anyone else, bringing you the details other channels miss. Now, let's unwrap this dark Christmas story. In the small rural town of Carnation, Washington, just 25 miles east of Seattle, Wayne and Judy Anderson had built what appeared to be a picture-perfect life. Spanning just over 1 square mile with a population of about 2,000 people, Carnation is the kind of tight-knit community where neighbors know each other by name and violent crime is virtually unheard of. Wayne Anderson, 60, was a respected Boeing engineer who had worked his way up through the company over decades of dedicated service. His wife Judy, 61, was equally respected in the community as a friendly, reliable employee of the U.S. Postal Service. Neighbors and co-workers described the couple as the backbone of their small community, hardworking, honest, and kind. The Andersons had built their life in Carnation since the early 1980s, raising 3 children in their rural home: Scott, their son, Mary, their eldest daughter, and Michelle, their youngest daughter. By Christmas 2007, Wayne and Judy had welcomed grandchildren into their growing family and took particular joy in Scott's 2 young children: 5-year-old Olivia, with her bright smile and artistic nature, and 3-year-old Nathan, a curious, energetic little boy just beginning to discover the world. The Christmas season of 2007 was supposed to be like any other for the Anderson family, a time of celebration and togetherness. Wayne and Judy had invited their children and grandchildren over for a Christmas Eve dinner, a family tradition they cherished. The refrigerator was stocked with holiday food, and wrapped presents waited beneath the tree for eager little hands to open them the next morning. But for the Anderson family, Christmas morning would never come. Michelle Kristen Anderson was the youngest of Wayne and Judy's 3 children. Born in 1978, she had graduated from Cedar Crest High School in nearby Duvall, Washington in 1997. Former classmates described her as an artistic, sweet girl who typically hung out with unpopular kids, but beneath that surface there were troubling signs. Even as a teenager, Michelle would tell classmates that she had a volatile relationship with her parents. She claimed her father hit her and that her mother was mean and didn't understand her. Years later, these claims would be investigated and found to be completely unfounded. By all accounts, Wayne and Judy had provided Michelle with a normal, loving upbringing, the same they had given their other children. The only person Michelle spoke lovingly about was her older brother Scott. She told classmates he was the only one she really trusted, as they had, presumably, went through their abusive childhood together. This fabricated history of abuse would later become a crucial element in understanding the tragedy that unfolded. By 2002, at around 24 years old, Michelle had met Joseph McEnroe through an online dating site. Their relationship quickly became all-consuming and isolated. Joseph promptly moved to Washington to be with Michelle, and the couple began living together in a mobile home park. Those who knew Joseph described him as a little bit weird. He would regularly talk about how his spirit guide would tell him how to live his life. Medical records would later reveal he had been diagnosed with severe anxiety, for which he was supposed to be taking medication and attending counseling, neither of which he could afford. Once Joseph and Michelle began dating, they became essentially inseparable and increasingly isolated from others. Neighbors at the mobile home park found the couple to be paranoid and mentally unstable. They had covered all the windows in their trailer with black material and frequently expressed fears that people were out to get them. One neighbor recalled, "They said numerous times that they feared for their lives. They felt that they only had each other, that they could only trust each other." Michelle would often complain to neighbors that her parents had substantial wealth, but were withholding it from her. She portrayed herself and Joseph as struggling victims, while her family lived in luxury, another narrative that investigation would later disprove. The Andersons were comfortable but hardly wealthy, living modest lives on their rural property. The dynamic between Joseph and Michelle was obviously unhealthy to anyone who observed them. Michelle was clearly the dominant partner, often answering questions directed at Joseph. He appeared to worship her, accepting her view of reality without question and looking to her for direction and approval. Neighbors frequently overheard vicious arguments between the couple. During one particularly heated exchange, Michelle was heard screaming at Joseph, "You have no job, you have no money, you have no life." Despite these troubles, in 2006, Michelle's parents allowed the couple to move a mobile home onto their property in Carnation. This act of generosity would, in just over a year, lead to their brutal murders. By late 2007, the relationship between Michelle and her parents had grown increasingly strained. After allowing the couple to live rent-free on their property for a year, Wayne and Judy had recently begun asking Michelle to pay a modest rent for the trailer space, a perfectly reasonable request that Michelle interpreted as a grave insult. Meanwhile, Michelle had convinced herself that her brother Scott owed her approximately $40,000, money she claimed she had loaned him years earlier. No evidence of this loan has ever been found, and family members have consistently denied its existence. Nevertheless, in Michelle's increasingly distorted worldview, this perceived debt became another grievance against her family. 2 weeks before Christmas, Michelle made a disturbing vow. If her family didn't start showing her proper respect by December 24th, she would kill them all. This wasn't an idle threat made in the heat of anger. Michelle began methodically planning the massacre, and she enlisted Joseph as her willing accomplice.
So I told Michelle, I'm like, okay, what now? Okay, so it's like, it's your idea, your plan, but what now?
Months earlier, the couple had purchased handguns from a local pawn shop. They now began preparing these weapons for what they called Michelle's plan. Joseph would later claim that Michelle had manipulated him into participating, but his willing involvement and the cold calculation they both displayed suggest a much more active role. On the afternoon of December 24, 2007, Michelle and Joseph armed themselves with their handguns and drove the short distance from their trailer to the main house. Inside, Wayne and Judy were preparing for their family gathering. Judy was in a back bedroom, wrapping Christmas presents for her grandchildren, while Wayne was in another part of the house. Joseph distracted Judy while Michelle confronted her father. According to their later confessions, Michelle attempted to shoot Wayne, but her gun jammed. Hearing the commotion, Joseph rushed in and shot Wayne in the head, killing him instantly. When Judy heard the shot and her husband's collapse, she ran into the room, screaming in terror. Joseph turned his weapon on her, firing once. As Judy fell to the floor, she continued screaming, so Joseph apologized to her before delivering a final shot to her head. With Michelle's parents now dead, the couple didn't flee the scene in panic or remorse. Instead, they methodically cleaned up the blood with towels and rugs, dragged the bodies to a shed behind the house, and then returned to wait inside the home. They knew that Scott, his wife Erica, and their 2 young children were expected to arrive soon for the Christmas celebration. This calculated waiting period reveals the true horror of their plan. They weren't acting in a moment of passion or rage. They had deliberately chosen Christmas Eve, knowing the entire family would gather, giving them the opportunity to eliminate everyone at once. Approximately an hour later, Scott and Erica Anderson arrived with their children, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan. They parked in the driveway, excited for the family gathering, completely unaware of the horror that had already unfolded and what awaited them inside. As they entered the home, the family was immediately confronted by Michelle and Joseph, both armed with handguns. Seeing the weapons, Scott charged at his sister in a desperate attempt to protect his family. A struggle ensued, but Joseph intervened, helping Michelle overpower her brother. During this chaotic moment, Michelle shot Scott multiple times. Then they turned their attention to Erica, who was desperately trying to shield her children. Michelle shot Erica twice, but the wounded mother's survival instinct gave her unexpected strength. Despite her injuries, Erica managed to crawl across the room toward a cordless phone. In what would be her final act of courage, Erica reached the phone and dialed 911.
Hello?
Within 10 seconds, Joseph had caught up to Erica, wrestled the phone away from her dying grasp, and ripped out the batteries to disconnect the call. While Erica was still conscious, Joseph reportedly allowed her a brief moment to huddle with her terrified children before he shot her point-blank in the head. This final mercy, allowing a mother to embrace her children before executing her and then them, demonstrates the twisted psychology at work. With both parents dead, Joseph and Michelle now face the two youngest victims, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan. These were innocent children who posed no threat to them. Children who had just witnessed the murder of their parents on Christmas Eve and were likely in a state of shock and terror beyond anything we can imagine. In his later confession, Joseph described approaching 3-year-old Nathan first, as the boy was closest to him. What happened next is perhaps the most heartbreaking detail of the entire case. According to Joseph, the toddler held up the phone battery that Joseph had just ripped from the device, like he understood and accepted what was going on. Whether this was a child's attempt to appease the monster before him, or simply the innocent gesture of a 3-year-old who didn't understand the situation, we'll never know. What we do know is that Joseph responded to this gesture by shooting the child in the head at close range. He then turned to 5-year-old Olivia, the last surviving member of the family, and executed her in the same manner. When later asked why they killed the children, Joseph's response was chilling in its twisted logic. "I didn't want them to turn us in, and they wouldn't want to live without their parents." He also expressed the belief that the children were already corrupted, or would be corrupted by witnessing their parents' deaths, so killing them was freeing them to be reborn in a better life. Michelle later added her own justification, claiming they killed the children to spare them from being scarred for life after seeing their parents murdered. This distorted rationalization, presenting an act of ultimate cruelty as an act of mercy, reveals the profound moral and psychological detachment of both killers. In total, Joseph and Michelle had fired 16 shots. All 6 victims were shot in the head, execution style. Following standard protocol, the 911 dispatcher attempted to call back the number from which Erica's desperate call had originated. When no one answered, police were dispatched to the Anderson home, arriving approximately 6 minutes after the initial call. However, when officers reached the property, they found the driveway gate locked. Michelle had taken the precaution of securing it after realizing Erica's call had connected, anticipating this very scenario. Faced with a locked gate and no visible signs of disturbance from the road, the responding officers made a fateful decision. They simply reported, "Gate is locked, unable to gain access," and left the scene without further investigation. This devastating failure of police procedure meant that for the next 2 days, while families across America were celebrating Christmas, the bodies of the Anderson family lay undiscovered. The presents Judy had been wrapping remained unfinished. The holiday meal never made it to the table, and the killers remained free. On December 26th, the day after Christmas, when the normally punctual Judy Anderson failed to report for her shift at the Postal Service, her co-worker and best friend Linda Thiele grew concerned. Linda decided to check on her friend, driving to the Anderson home. Upon arriving, Linda encountered the same locked gate that had deterred police 2 days earlier. Unlike the officers, however, Linda simply walked around the gate and proceeded to the house. Finding the door unlocked, she entered and immediately discovered a scene of unimaginable horror. The first body she saw was Scott Anderson's, lying on the floor. Initially, Linda thought there might have been some kind of carbon monoxide poisoning, and she was preparing to drag Scott's body outside when she noticed the gunshot wound to his head. Looking further into the home, she saw more victims. Shaking and in shock, Linda called 911.
911?
There's been a murder. There's 3 people dead that I can see right now.
Inside?
I just came up. She works with me.
Inside the house?
Yes.
What do you see?
There's a baby and a man and a woman, and she's my best friend.
During this call, Linda shared something crucial with the dispatcher. her suspicion that Michelle Anderson might be involved. She knew Michelle had been upset with her parents about being asked to pay rent for the mobile home. This initial insight would quickly help direct the investigation. Police swarmed the property, and a full investigation was launched. Detectives quickly located all 6 bodies, Scott, Erica, and their children in the main house, and Wayne and Judy in the shed behind the property where their bodies had been dragged. The crime scene told a story of cold-blooded execution rather than a heat of passion killing or robbery gone wrong. The precision of the gunshot wounds, the methodical cleanup, and the calculated disposal of Wayne and Judy's bodies all pointed to a planned massacre. As police were processing this gruesome scene on December 26th, something unexpected happened. Michelle Anderson and Joseph McEnroe drove up to the property in their pickup truck. This wasn't a coincidence or bad timing on their part. It was remarkably part of their plan. After committing the murders, Michelle and Joseph had driven north toward Canada, then changed direction and headed south toward Oregon before ultimately deciding to return to the scene 2 days later. Their plan, as they would later admit, was to discover the bodies themselves and feign shock and grief, establishing themselves as innocent family members rather than suspects. What they hadn't anticipated was that Linda would discover the bodies first, bringing police to the scene before they could execute this part of their plan. When they arrived at the property and saw the police presence, they didn't flee, perhaps knowing this would only confirm their guilt. Instead, they drove directly up to the house where officers immediately separated them for questioning. Most striking to detectives was Michelle's behavior. Despite the massive police presence, the crime scene tape, and the obvious investigation underway at her parents' home, she didn't ask a single question about what had happened. This unnatural lack of curiosity immediately raised red flags. When Detective Tompkins finally asked Michelle what she thought all the police cars were doing at the property, her response was telling, "I think the house is on fire." When told that law enforcement doesn't typically respond in such force for a house fire, Michelle eventually uttered 3 words that would seal her fate: "It's my fault." Over the next several hours, both Michelle and Joseph provided full confessions to police. Their accounts were disturbingly detailed and largely consistent with each other and the physical evidence at the scene. Michelle's statement began with a revealing complaint: "My brother owes me a lot of money." She explained her belief that Scott had borrowed $40,000 from her and hadn't repaid it, though no evidence of this loan has ever been found. She also expressed anger that her parents had recently begun asking her to pay rent for living on their property after a year of free accommodation. These trivial grievances, a disputed loan and being asked to pay rent as an adult, were apparently sufficient motivation for Michelle to orchestrate the execution of her entire family, including 2 young children. Joseph's confession revealed even more disturbing details about their mindset during the killings. He described apologizing to Judy Anderson before delivering the fatal shot to her head. He recounted allowing Erica a moment to embrace her children before executing her, and most chillingly, he described Nathan holding up the phone battery to him just before he shot the 3-year-old in the head. When asked why they killed the children, Joseph explained they didn't want witnesses and believed the children were already corrupted or would be corrupted by witnessing their parents' deaths. In his twisted logic, killing them was freeing them to be reborn in a better life. The confessions painted a picture not of a crime of passion, but of a coldly premeditated mass murder motivated by petty grievances and justified through a profoundly distorted moral framework. Despite the comprehensive confessions and overwhelming physical evidence, it would take nearly 8 years for the case to go to trial. This extraordinary delay resulted primarily from legal wrangling over whether the prosecution would seek the death penalty. In October 2008, the prosecutor announced his intention to pursue capital punishment for both defendants. However, 4 years later, a judge ruled the state could not seek the death penalty. Then, in September 2013, the Washington State Supreme Court overturned that ruling, allowing the death penalty to remain an option. During this time, Washington Governor Jay Inslee also placed a moratorium on capital punishment in the state, further complicating the legal landscape. Throughout these delays, family members of the victims grew increasingly frustrated, even staging protests outside the courthouse with signs reading, "We want the death penalty, and we want it now." Mary Anderson, Wayne and Judy's daughter, who had not attended the Christmas Eve gathering due to illness, thereby unwittingly avoiding her siblings' fate, waited year after year for justice for her parents, brother, sister-in-law, and young niece and nephew. Joseph McEnroe's trial finally began on January 20th, 2015, more than 7 years after the murders. The prosecution pursued the death penalty, while the defense argued that Joseph was mentally ill and had been manipulated and coerced by Michelle into participating in the killings. Throughout the trial, Joseph's behavior was bizarre and inconsistent. He appeared heavily medicated, frequently shifting between emotional extremes, laughing inappropriately one moment and sobbing the next. Most notably, he began speaking in a softer voice than he had used in his initial police interviews and developed a convenient twitch that observers noted seemed to appear primarily when the jury was present. When the prosecutor pointed out that this twitch had never been mentioned in police reports and seemed to disappear when the jury wasn't watching, Joseph claimed it was because he was under stress during testimony. This theatrical behavior suggested Joseph was actively attempting to create sympathy with the jury or build a foundation for an insanity defense. Joseph's defense team brought in a psychology professor who testified that he suffered from folie à deux, a rare psychiatric syndrome in which a delusional belief is transmitted from one person to another. In this case, the argument was that Michelle's paranoia and distorted worldview had essentially infected Joseph's mind, making him believe in her warped reality. The defense also highlighted Joseph's troubled childhood, claiming his mother had been abusive and had used him to manipulate her own parents for money. This upbringing, they argued, had made him vulnerable to Michelle's control and manipulation as an adult. On the stand, Joseph attempted to portray himself as a helpless victim of Michelle's influence. "She said she needed me, and I believed her." He claimed she would snap her fingers in his face like you're a dog to train him to listen to her. This narrative of complete subjugation clashed with the methodical, active role he had played in the murders, as described in his own confession. In a telling exchange during cross-examination, the prosecutor asked Joseph, "Would you agree with me that you have a pretty strong motive to lie to this jury?" Joseph replied, "No," before admitting moments later, "There are some cases where I lied, yes." After considering all the evidence, on March 25, 2015, the jury found Joseph guilty on all 6 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. The jury then had to decide whether to impose the death penalty. 8 jurors voted in favor of execution, while 4 opposed it. Because a unanimous decision is required for capital punishment in Washington state, Joseph instead received 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Michelle Anderson's trial began in January 2016, approximately a year after Joseph's conviction. Given the outcome of Joseph's case and the ongoing shifts in Washington's death penalty laws, the prosecutor announced he would not seek capital punishment for Michelle. Throughout her legal proceedings, Michelle's behavior had been markedly different from Joseph's. From the moment of her arrest, she had consistently acknowledged her guilt and responsibility for the murders. In a 2008 jailhouse interview with the Seattle Times, she stated, "I need to be executed for everything that I've done. Deciding that I want to die was the most difficult decision I've ever had to make, and I was able to make it without a second thought because I know what I've done and I want to take responsibility for it." This stance put her at odds with her own defense team, who wanted to pursue strategies that might save her from the death penalty. She refused to meet with her attorneys for 5 straight years because they wanted her to undergo psychiatric evaluation, a step that might have established mental illness as a mitigating factor. Michelle's trial revealed additional details about her relationship with Joseph and her mindset leading up to the murders. Evidence showed that she had fabricated the stories of childhood abuse she had told classmates and later Joseph. Witnesses testified that Wayne and Judy had been normal, loving parents who supported their daughter, despite her increasingly erratic behavior. The prosecution presented Michelle as the driving force behind the murders, the planner and instigator who had convinced Joseph to participate. They emphasized that the killings were premeditated and methodically executed, not the result of a momentary loss of control. On March 4, 2016, Michelle was convicted on all 6 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. Like Joseph, she received 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Carnation Massacre is the seeming disconnect between the trivial nature of the grievances and the extreme violence of the response. How does someone decide that being asked to pay rent justifies murdering their entire family? Psychologists who have studied the case suggest that Michelle and Joseph existed in a mutually reinforcing bubble of paranoia and distorted thinking. Neighbors had described them as increasingly isolated and suspicious, with blackened windows and constant fears of persecution. This isolation allowed their shared delusions to grow unchecked by outside reality. Michelle appears to have constructed an elaborate narrative in which she was the perpetual victim. Abused by her parents as a child, cheated by her brother as an adult, and now being further victimized by being asked to pay rent. Joseph, with his own history of anxiety and instability, bought into this narrative completely. Some experts have suggested that Michelle may suffer from a severe personality disorder, possibly narcissistic or borderline personality disorder with paranoid features. These conditions can create a profound sense of grievance and entitlement, along with black and white thinking that categorizes people as either completely good or completely evil. What makes the case even more challenging to understand is that neither Michelle nor Joseph experienced a psychotic break in the clinical sense. They were not hearing voices commanding them to kill, apart from Joseph's vague references to spirit guides. They were not disconnected from reality to the point of not understanding their actions. They planned the murders methodically, carried them out systematically, and took concrete steps to avoid being caught, all indicating an awareness of the wrongfulness of their actions. Today, Joseph McEnroe remains imprisoned at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, while Michelle Anderson serves her time at the Washington Correction Center for Women in Gig Harbor. Despite extensive research and monitoring, there have been surprisingly few reports about either prisoner since their incarceration. No interviews, no further confessions, no significant behavioral incidents. The Washington State Penitentiary, where Joseph is held, also houses other notorious killers, including serial killer Robert Lee Yates, who actually worked at the prison before becoming an inmate there, and Jack Owen Spillman, known as the Werewolf Butcher. The Washington Corrections Center for Women previously housed Mary Kay Letourneau, the former teacher convicted of raping her 12-year-old student before her release in 2004. Both facilities offer standard rehabilitation programs, educational opportunities, and mental health services to inmates. However, given their sentences of life without parole, neither Michelle nor Joseph will ever have the opportunity to apply what they might learn from such programs outside prison walls. The Carnation Christmas Massacre forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about human nature and the fragility of the social contract. How can someone become so detached from normal human empathy that they can murder children? What combination of psychological factors, relationship dynamics, and personal history creates the perfect storm for such violence? One particularly troubling aspect of this case is how close it came to remaining unsolved. Had the police officers who responded to Erica's 911 call simply walked around the locked gate, as Linda Teeler would do 2 days later, 6 lives might have been saved. This failure of procedure led to changes in how many police departments respond to incomplete 911 calls, emphasizing the need for more thorough investigation even when access seems difficult. The case also highlights the complicated relationship between mental health and criminal responsibility. While both killers clearly had psychological issues, neither met the legal standard for insanity. They knew what they were doing was wrong, yet they chose to do it anyway. This challenges us to think carefully about how we balance accountability with an understanding of mental health factors in criminal cases. The Carnation Christmas Massacre stands as one of the most senseless and disturbing family annihilations in American criminal history. What makes this case so haunting isn't just the brutality of the crime or the complete innocence of the victims. It's the utter senselessness of it all. 6 lives extinguished over petty grievances and imagined slights. As we close this case, we're left with the disturbing reality that sometimes the most dangerous threats aren't strangers lurking in the shadows, but the people closest to us, the ones we've invited into our homes and lives. Sometimes the most horrific acts of violence stem not from grand ideological motivations or clear psychosis, but from a slow, insidious warping of normal human grievances into something monstrous. The Anderson family's story is a stark reminder of the darkness that can hide behind ordinary facades in ordinary towns, even at the most joyful time of year. But perhaps it also serves as a reminder to cherish our own families, to recognize the precious fragility of life, and to be vigilant about the warning signs of dangerous isolation and paranoia in those around us. If you found this case as disturbing and thought-provoking as I did, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of complex criminal cases. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories with the care and thoroughness they deserve. I'll see you in the next video.